Vance, welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Carey. I'm super excited for our conversation.
Yeah, so we got to know each other. I think mutual friend introduced us.
That's right.
And you're a young leader, like a lot of the people listening to this podcast. If I can ask you, how old are you right now?
32.
32. Okay, so fairly young. Startup founder, which we're going to talk about in the space of stock donation, fintech. We're going to talk a little bit of crypto today. But right out of college, I think it was 2011, you started at Google. What did you learn as a Googler and what did you do there?
I learned a lot as a Googler. I was there for just under 2 years. So it was a pretty quick stint, but an incredible start to my career. So the two main things that I took away from Google is one, the importance of automation. They are maniacal at Google. This was a culture point, actually. Automate yourself out of a job.
Really? Okay. Well, let's drill down on that. When you say automation, I'm sure a lot of people think about robots, but that's not what you're talking about, is it? Are you talking about systems? Like what are you automating?
Yeah. So any workflows that you're doing manually that you're repeating daily, you should not be doing that, right? You should be writing a script. They would actually encourage people like me that were on the ops and business side to learn coding, to learn Python specifically, so that you can create scripts to automate your work. They wanted you to literally automate yourself out of a job. And so that was one really interesting thing within the culture of Google that I thought was really unique. I remember, running this special ops project where it required some manual investigation. I was on the fraud, spam, and abuse team at Google.
Okay.
And there was a lot of things that our system was missing. And so I created this project where we would go do deep dives into certain fraudulent ads that were missed and actually do big research projects on it. When I presented this project to the engineering team, the head of machine learning for our department got so frustrated, he walked out of the meeting because there was so much manual, processes connected to the way I was approaching the work. And at the time, I didn't really understand. I was like, man, is he just having a bad day? But I started to realize over time that this was a core value within the company. So back in 2011, that was very much at the forefront of Google.
So you're like 21, straight out of college.
That's right.
What had you studied? Was it business, engineering? What was your course of study?
I studied marketing and information systems at the University of Washington. Go Dogs. And, from there, got recruited to Google. So automation was a big thing. Another big thing I learned from Google that has carried with me today is autonomy. So they really empowered people. They didn't micromanage. They would ramp you up, train you, give you a very clear goal, and trust that you'll figure it out. And Google is famous for things like 20% time, which was basically, hey, 80% do your core work, 20% do anything that you want that you think is going to increase the value of Google's product. And then they would have 1% projects. Donate your time to anything that you want. They were very empowering in that way. And I thought that was really cool.
Well, there's so much right there. And I know we're going to talk about a lot of things today, Vance. But first of all, when you're describing that project, all I'm thinking about is, wait a minute, you're like barely out of college, 20, 21 years old. And they're giving you this like fix spam and abuse on the internet. Like that is your goal. Like that, most leaders listening to this, including leaders my age, younger leaders, would say, I'm not trusting a 21-year-old with that, but they did.
Right.
Why do you think they trust young leaders?
I think a lot has to do with their recruiting process. They have a very, very rigorous recruiting process. I had like 12 interviews, right? Wow. Across 2 days, and they were pretty intense. They would ask market sizing questions, problem solving questions. I was on the ops and business side. They were asking me coding questions, right? And so I do think that they trust their recruiting process so much that if you are in, then they pretty much empower you to figure it out because you've passed some sort of bar or criteria to make them believe that you're able to figure it out.
So you don't know coding. I still do not code. I have a son who codes. How did you figure it out?
Yeah. So Google, at the time I joined, they were around 10,000 people already, a lot of resources. So their leadership and development programming was pretty built out. So really it was unlimited in terms of the resources that you had to learn what you were interested in or what they encouraged you in. And so the creator of Python literally was at Google as a dedicated resource to teach you the language that he created, right? That's the type of...
And is that a code language? Forgive my ignorance.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a code language, historically used for a lot of automation scripts and things like that. And so the creator of that code language literally is the person teaching me how to use his language, right? And so those are the type of unfair resources and advantages that Google had for their employees, which looking back at it was brilliant.
And I'm sure for the rest of us, there's YouTube and there's books you can buy and the internet, which does help with
now
that.
There is.
Okay.
That's right.
One of the questions, Vance, I try not to ask on every episode because I could ask it on every episode, but I had it begged to ask you was how do you get it all done? So you're 32 years old. You've been in leadership for a decade, like out of school. Yeah. You've got 4 kids under the age of 6. You work at a church, and then you actually started Overflow as a company, I don't know, on the side as a main thing. And like you were just crushing it. But I'm going to ask it now because number one, I wanted to know, but number two, it's got to have something to do with automation, doesn't it? Or not? No. I might be wrong on that.
Yeah. I would actually say it's a lot more about people. I have this mantra, I learned at a conference several years back that has just stuck with me. Life travels at the speed of relationship. And what I learned is my capacity and my ability to move quickly is fully dependent on the people around me. And I've learned that over the past decade, that if I can surround myself with the right people, the right team, create an environment where they feel like they're empowered, they have all the tools that they need to be able to accomplish the objective or the goal, shared goal that we have together, that really multiplies my impact, right? And at that point, if I can gather that group of people, my job becomes unblocking them and supporting them. If I can do that really, really well, then ultimately I can spin all these proverbial plates, right? But without that, without a stellar team at our church, without the stellar team that we've organized at Overflow, without my wife, who has been just, my partner in everything from family to church to business, I wouldn't be able to. I'm really a product of the people around me.
Right. Okay. Well, that is a great answer. I love that answer. And we might double click on that one later in the interview. Anything else on automation though? Because that one really hit me. And I mean, I've read the 4-Hour Workweek like millions of other people. That book is a lot about automation and what can you automate. And I think there is an inefficiency in a lot of us as leaders who end up doing the same thing over and over again every day that we could simply automate. Can you give us just a couple of tangible examples of things that you've automated either then at Google in your life or that you've continued to automate so that you can focus on other things?
Yeah. So the specific thing that we were working on at Google was there was, ads, accounts, landing pages that were constantly trying to infiltrate the advertising system at Google, literally trying to show themselves on AdWords, counterfeit goods, drugs, pharmaceuticals that were uncertified, things of that nature. And so, there's 2 extreme ways that you can try to shield against that. You can literally have every single ad go through a human review process, or you can build an algorithm to try to detect automatically what might be fraudulent and what might not be fraudulent. And so Google did a mixture of both of those strategies, leaning towards, trying to make as much of it algorithmic as possible. So 95% of bad ads were actually caught by our automated systems. The other 5% that were suspect were under human review. But what was interesting was that the sites that were under human review that got categorized and tagged were fed back into the machine learning model so that the algorithm got smarter over time, if that makes sense. And so it's actually a good analogy, because I think when people think about automating workflows, everybody's obsessed with, optimizing their productivity. They search for systems that require them or that enable them to set it and forget it. And what happens is that when you set something and forget something, all of a sudden the intentionality is removed from that thing. And just because it's automated doesn't mean it's better. Right? If you, for example, set and forget relationship building, and you write a bot, let's say, I have a script to email or text Carey once a month, right?
Right. And I get the same text from you every month.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm not actually tuning that, if I'm not actually personalizing that, if I'm not giving any intentionality to that, it's going to become white noise for you. Right. Yeah. And so it's actually not going to the automation doesn't always achieve the objective. And so you just got to be really careful about that.
Yeah. So follow the breadcrumbs to where you are in Overflow today. So after Google, you did what?
Yeah. So after Google, I got recruited to lead product at a growth stage startup called Adara. So we built the world's largest travel graph. So
wow.
we worked with Marriott, United, Delta, and we essentially stitched together a traveler's profile. We knew, historically hotels you booked, flights you booked, so that as you browsed and planned trips, we could personalize your experience across the web. So we would work with Airbnb, Disney, a lot of the biggest travel and tourism brands in the world to try to serve travelers in the best way that we could. And so I came in at about 2 million in revenue at that company and was part of a team, and we scaled it to over 100 million in gross revenue in a few years. And Google was cool, but when I got a taste of what a fast growth tech startup is like, I was like, this is where it's at. I could do this. Yeah.
So after that, was it direct to Overflow, or what happened after that?
So simultaneous to that, my wife and I co-founded a church with an Australian couple. Because as we know, Carey, the Bible is a lot better in an Aussie accent, right? And
it is.
So we met this Australian couple on Twitter, actually. And they were looking to launch a church. They were in Newcastle, Australia at the time, but they felt called from God to plant a church in the Silicon Valley. And they found us on Twitter. We connected. They flew over and we just hit it off. This was 9 years ago. We just hit it off. I toured them around Google. I was at Google at the time and toured them around Stanford. We end up at a Thai lunch spot together, and they start pitching this vision for this modern expression of church that would reach millennials in the Bay Area. And I was just eating pad Thai, listening to their vision. And after their 10-minute vision pitch, Pastor Adam, my pastor now, says, start it with us. And, based off pure naivety, Carey, my wife and I said yes. Because we didn't even know what that meant. So literally, a couple months later, they moved. They got a house in San Jose, California. And then over the next year, we started the church planting process with them. And so kind of while I was at Adara, we were just in the first couple of years of church planting Vive Church, the church we're continuing to build now. Yeah.
And Vive Church is, if I read it right, is it 10 locations now globally?
That's right. So we have 5 yeah.
That grew. Go ahead.
It grew. This past decade, God has been moving through our church. And it's been a huge blessing. So 5 locations in the San Francisco Bay Area, 5 locations outside of the Bay Area. So Chicago, Austin, Honolulu, and then 2 in Italy, Milan and Rome.
Wow. That's incredible. And what's your role at the church?
So historically, I've operated functionally as CFO, right? In amidst all the technology, projects and companies I've been a part of, I've held that role of CFO. In the past year, I've transitioned from that with just the demands of Overflow now to another incredible CFO that came from a career at Intel. And I sit now on the board as treasurer of our church and also still serving as a pastor.
And also still serving as a pastor.
Yeah.
Okay. So you go from Adara. Tell us about the origins of Overflow.
Yeah. So, fast forward to 2019, the church is growing, 4,000 members, 10 locations, and what I would characterize is a disproportionately generous community. This is something that had really captivated Kim and I since the beginning of our marriage, this concept of generosity. My life verse is Proverbs 11:24. The world of the generous gets larger and larger, right? The world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. And I saw this expression within the Vive community in a really profound way. Over the last 9 years, I saw people I do life with collectively give tens of millions of dollars away to build the church and also to give back to nonprofit organizations that we were passionate about and partnering with to serve the cities that we were located in. And so this theme was going on in the last decade of my life. But then something happened that was really interesting in 2019. I had about a dozen people in our congregation come up to me because they know me as CFO, now treasurer on the board. They would say, "Hey, Vance, how do I donate some of my Facebook, Google, Apple stock to Vive?" And at the time, Carey, I didn't know, but I knew that Facebook stock is valuable. So I should figure this out. And so I went to Fidelity to open up a brokerage account. By the way, that wasn't super seamless. It took me about 3 weeks, but got it done. And then I got an account number as well as some instructions from Fidelity to give back to our church members. So I sent that over to about a dozen people that had requested for this. And then I waited eagerly, right? and I didn't see anything come through the account. And I'm like, what's going on? I was a little bit frustrated because selfishly, I spent some time to open up this account and nothing was coming through. And so I went to one of my buddies and I said, "Hey, you mentioned that you wanted to donate some of your Facebook stock. This is kind of an awkward conversation, but I just haven't seen anything come through. Do you have all the information that you need?" And then he said, "Hey, Vance, I'm going to do it. It's just that I gave your information to my Charles Schwab broker and they said to download this form, to physically fill it out and to fax it in. I just haven't had a chance to do it, but I'll get it done before the end of the year because I want the tax."
Fax it in.
Yeah,
This is in 2019. Send me a fax.
Exactly,
Okay.
Carey. And that was honestly my epiphany moment. I was like, okay, that's right. If you tell a millennial to fax in anything, it's definitely not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Who has a fax machine? I mean, my goodness. I'm not a millennial. I do not know how to fax things. Yeah. Well, I don't have a machine.
Case in point, right? So, what the Spirit of God, I believe, was really speaking to me is, hey, if the only thing standing in the way of this donation, this gift, right, this contribution is a little bit of friction, what if we remove that friction? Probably what would happen is we would unlock unprecedented amounts of generosity. That was the hypothesis, October 2019. So all of October, I built a prototype, shout out to my Google days, learning a little bit about technology, right? Mm-hmm. And I emailed, 1,000 active recurring donors. And I said, hey, if you ever thought about donating stock before, or you want to do so because it's a very tax efficient way to give, you can do so now completely online through this online platform called Overflow. And I emailed that out. Across the next 3 days, 32 people responded to that email and we raised $1.1 million in stocks in 3 days.
That's incredible. Hey, I gotta tell you, and I know you and I've talked about this, but when I was still lead pastor, this is probably 7 years ago now, 8 years ago, I remember there's one guy at our church, he and his wife, very generous, sold their business and they wanted to give us a donation in stock. Okay. And I remember, and Canadian regulations are a bit different than the US, but it took us probably the better part of a year to transact that. And there was so much red tape. It was like, it was hard for us to receive. If somebody gives you $100 bill, that's great. And this was pushing six figures worth of a stock donation. So it was a very generous gift. And I just remember it being so difficult. So that's why when a mutual friend, was it Mike Arrieta who introduced us? I think it was. No?
It probably was a combination of him and Brad Lomenick.
And Brad Lomenick. Yeah, it was Lomenick and Mike Arrieta. That's right. And I'm so glad we've met. But I'm like, when I saw that idea, that's where I'm like, I'm all over this because the pain point was so high.
Yes.
And so pick up the story from there, because I think a lot of leaders who run churches, not-for-profits, can relate to that. Yeah. Where did it go from there? So you developed really, Overflow at the beginning was an internal solution for Vive Church, just to help facilitate. And you built what? Just a web app or something like that?
Exactly.
To
That's
facilitate
right.
it?
It was literally a simple website, right? That I built, and it was just kind of workflow automation in the back end. And I want to go into that, but quickly to your point with that specific example that you experienced, what's interesting is, that person that ended up giving a 7-figure gift, right? To persevere for a year.
I know.
To complete that gift. It's interesting because that gift starts to become a burden, right? Even though it's an incredibly generous gift. And so the opportunity is not just in making that gift a lot more seamless. The opportunity is encouraging that gift to happen again in the future. Right.
Exactly. I figured by the time it was done, I think my successor actually, it did take a year. And I remember, just to correct, it wasn't 7, it was 6, but not a big deal. Either, regardless of the amount, it's still a huge amount of money. Yeah. But I thought by the time it was done, when you tally up my time, the finance department's time, their time, my successor's time, we almost paid for the gift in labor. Do you know what I mean? And you're right. A lot of people would have given up. And there's probably so many people who are like, I would like to donate something. And, I hadn't thought about this until just now, but even when in the early days of starting out in the really small churches, there was a sweet old lady who died and left us $100,000 in stock. And that took another months and months and months to untangle and transfer.
Wow.
So, that was in the early days when the church had no money. But yeah, you're right. And when there have been so many times where I have sat somewhere and said, I want to give to this, but I don't know how, and I don't carry cash. And, there's no easy way to give. So eventually you kind of lose the moment. You just move on because you have your regular giving and that kind of thing. All right. So pick up the narrative. All right. You developed an internal web app.
Yeah. So I was solving my own problem, right? I was the customer.
Yeah.
And I got this realization because, I'm a tech guy as well, alongside being a pastor, and I'm entrepreneurial. So I got this thought. I was like, hey, this is a sample set of one, but to really, maximize the impact of what we created here, I wonder if other churches, nonprofits, universities, would want this, right? So I just started texting people, Carey, just pastor friends that I had, people that I knew that were running nonprofits. And I said, hey, this is what we did for Vive. Would you want this? Do you need it? Would you pay for it? Because in my mind, if we can create a sustainable business model, then we can really actually seriously scale this thing and serve many, many more people. And so it was pretty overwhelming, the responses. Everybody was like, yes, 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 I want it. I need it. I would pay for it. And so that was enough conviction for me to go to Sand Hill Road, to go to San Francisco. I'm blessed. I'm in a area where there is people that are willing to take flyers on ideas like this and put some money behind supporting and scaling ideas because they've seen it have world-changing impact, right? And so I went on the road and I started pitching it. To be honest, the first 50 pitches went terribly. It was.
So can I just interrupt for a second? For leaders who haven't been to Silicon Valley, Sand Hill Road is where all the VCs are. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Greylock Partners are there. I mean, that's where Reed Hastings hangs out, and that's where all the money is. And
that's right.
So you start pitching, and first 50 did not go well. First 50, okay. Leaders, take note. First 50 did not go well. Most of us quit after 2. It's like, well, I tried that. Bad idea. I guess it doesn't work, right? First 50 did not go well. All right.
Yeah. I was a glutton for punishment for sure. 50 rejections straight up. And I was actually getting pretty discouraged. Anybody would, right? Getting pretty discouraged. And I saw this tweet, I call Twitter now the holy dove. I met my pastors through it. I, I got this tweet in a very discouraging time in my life that said, rejection is my insight. And I thought, yeah, you know what? Okay, cool. I had 50 rejections, but I also had 50 opportunities to learn something about my business, about my product, about my idea. Right. And so I just chose to flip my perspective a little bit. And in conjunction with that, I really did hear the Spirit of God tell me, stop trying to convince them, teach them. So transparently, Carey, the way that I was approaching these venture capitalist meetings was trying to reconfigure myself to how I thought they wanted to hear my idea and they wanted to see me. So I really downplayed me being a pastor because I thought that would really disqualify me or categorize me in a certain bucket that they would dismiss. I really kind of downplayed some of the underlying biblical, proverbs that was the basis of the mission
of your
and the
first
vision.
50 pitches.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I really just felt convicted by God. Stop trying to convince them, teach them. You're the subject matter expert in the room for this business. And so when I switched my mentality, and I started leading honestly with Proverbs 11:24, I started being a lot more bold about my experiences with, church building and church planning. The amount of interest and momentum in the fundraising process from there accelerated like crazy. And I felt a little bit silly, right? But then I was like, okay, thank you, God, for allowing me to go through that process.
So if you can give us the 30-second elevator pitch of the 50 times rejected proposal and then the 30-second elevator pitch for the one that won, I'd just love to see the difference. Is that fair or is that too hard to do on the spot?
I could give probably a general idea, right?
Yeah, sure. So let's just see.
Part of it is probably taking that trauma and putting it. So I'm gonna have to dig it a little bit.
You're going to have to go to therapy after this interview. I'm sorry, Vance.
No. I'm joking. So when I was initially pitching it, I was really emphasizing, hey, this is a massive market. Check this out. $450 billion is donated every year. If we just can serve a fraction of that, right? And we have a processing fee, then we become, $1 billion business. And, all of those things are still true, the fundamentals of that. But the reality is that doesn't make me different than anybody else. And it ultimately is not very inspiring or actually is truly authentic to my heart behind why I'm building Overflow, right?
And they may have heard that pitch many times over, right?
Yeah.
So many people read the news every day. And if we can just capture 1% of the market, so many people work out every day.
Exactly.
So many people are on diets if we get 0.5% of the market. So how did it change? What was different?
It changed with basically what I told you about the origin story of Overflow, starting with that. That's it. Just starting with,
hey, we had this problem. Guy wanted to give us some Facebook stock and we couldn't do it.
Exactly. So starting very simply with the initial problem and how we approached the solution. And then talking about the future that we saw, right? Based on our conviction in Proverbs 11:24 being fundamentally true and being a first principle in life. The world of the generous gets larger and larger. What does that actually mean? When somebody actually experiences giving, not of their time, but actually releasing finances, they experience an enlarged life. It actually literally releases a dopamine in your brain on the level of eating food and getting to shelter. And if we can actually unlock unprecedented amounts of generosity, but providing a technology platform that makes it so easy to give whatever you have that's in your hand, whether it's stock, crypto, a used car, equity in your home to causes that you care about, we fundamentally change the world, not just because we have unlocked resources for organizations that could use it, but because something fundamentally happens when somebody releases resources and money is not a master in their life anymore, and they connect themselves to something beyond themselves. When I explained that and I taught that to some of the top investors in the Silicon Valley, they were just captivated. Most of my investors are secular. And so when I brought in the Bible, it's not necessarily they were subscribing to the Bible, but they believed in the first principle of what I was talking about.
Did you get to repitch to some of those first 50 or did you have to start?
Did.
You did.
I did.
Wow. How did you get a second hearing? How did you get a second audience? That's hard for a lot of, first of all, everybody would have quit by now, but you didn't. Secondly, you're going back to people who said, get out of my office. And you're coming back and say, but wait, there's more. How did that go, Vance?
Sometimes when people see that you do what you say, it overcomes any hesitation that they had about you or your idea, right? And so people that I pitched first, right? They passed respectfully, and nobody was, mean about it. They were just, respectfully passed. And over the past 6 months, as I kept them updated, as I showed them that, hey, we're actually starting to get pilot customers, we're actually doing donations through the platform. As they saw the trajectory over the 6 months, they actually reached back out to me, giving me another shot, saying, hey, this is actually really interesting that you're getting traction. It overcomes a lot of the initial hesitations that we had. Let's talk. Right? Yeah.
So you kept them in the loop.
100%.
You kept emailing them. You're very good at that. You're excellent with communication. So you kept emailing them saying, thanks so much for the audience, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so. And, really appreciate it. Just want you to know I'm going to continue going with it. And then they started reaching back out to you. Okay.
That's right.
Well, that is a lesson in perseverance. That is a lesson in not failing. So you got your initial round of funding. And then tell us the next steps.
Yeah. So we got our initial round of funding. And then July 2020, we officially launched the platform. We had a couple pilots under our belt. So we felt pretty confident about our platform. And when we launched, it just started taking off, Carey. We started getting interest from Elevation Church, other churches like Hillsong. In the nonprofit space, Meals on Wheels, our good friend Brett Hagler from News Story.
Yeah, from News Story.
That's right. And also big institutions like Stanford and NYC, as well as corporations like Twilio. And we just started serving many of these organizations, facilitating generosity. And that continued to create echo chambers across the valley and, really got, other folks like Salesforce Ventures to help us facilitate another round of funding that's allowed this most recent acceleration of our growth.
Okay, so that is a fascinating story. What I would love to do, though, is because we do have a lot of charitable, not-for-profit church leaders, as well as business leaders who probably want to give something listening. Give us an idea of the state of the donation industry. I don't even know what to call it. Atmosphere today. Like, how much is cash? And then how much do you think could be released if there was an easy way to donate stock, if there was an easy way? Because more and more people, I'm certainly not yet in that category, but I know a number of people who have just decided they've done very well in life. They have more than they know what to do with. And they're signing the Bill Gates, Warren Buffett pledge to give over half of their giving away in their lifetime. The Green family has done that with Hobby Lobby. Wow. They're basically saying this is just a giving thing. And they've been very public about it. So I can imagine that there is a lot of money sitting in even small congregations that could be released in this kind of thing. What does the giving landscape look like right now?
Yeah, so giving overall, actually alluded to it earlier, $450 billion is given every single year, right?
In America alone.
In America alone. And 33% of that actually goes to the local church.
Wow.
The church is the most generous category by far. In second place is education at 13%.
Wow.
Okay. So largely, most of the giving is pioneered and led by Christians, which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
But most of that, as it should be, right? That's fantastic. Yeah. It's phenomenal, and it inspires me. And so most of that, though, is currently in cash, right? Most of that 450 billion is from people's ACH, debit, credit, check, right? Type of giving. And, what's interesting is that actually is a little bit backwards if you think about where wealth is actually held. So 90% of wealth is actually in non-cash assets. So if you think about it, the next wave, the next unlock of generosity is not going to come from a step function in people's checking and savings account, but it's to allow people to give directly from their portfolio, right? To allow them to give from their overflow. So let me put it another way, because I know a lot of church leaders listen to your podcast, Carey. We have in our congregations people that tithe, right? But we all know this, that most of the church don't have a conviction of a tithe yet, right? They're on a journey.
True.
And that's okay. The reality is people that don't tithe, their average gift to the church is $128. Okay. So it's not a tithe, it's a tip. Okay. And again, that's okay. But it's a tip that is coming from their leftovers. Because when they're giving from their checking account, they're doing an automatic calculation in their head. Okay, I have, rent, I have school fees, I have groceries. Oh, it's Christmas time. I got to buy all these gifts. Oh, we're saving for that vacation. Okay, God, okay, church, here's $128. That's what I have left over. Right.
Yeah.
But if you actually flip the script, if you actually allow them not to give from their leftovers, but to give from their overflow, from their abundance, from their appreciated gains in their stock portfolio. Let's say they're in crypto and they've been blessed with some gains in their crypto wallet. They have a different mentality. So our average donation through Overflow today is $9,500 in value.
Wow.
Right? So people are just disproportionately more generous when they realize they can give from this pocket.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about people have said boomers are about to do the biggest generational wealth transfer in history. A lot of that is going to kids and grandkids who can't afford houses. I mean, we're not going to talk about the jacked up housing market, but we could. And, people, unfortunately, when you look back at the last 2 years, we had that huge stock market crash right around the onset of the pandemic, and then it bounded back to the biggest market in history. And the middle's disappearing. There were winners and there were losers. And a lot of people won in that one, but a lot of people lost. So when you think about income redistribution, when you think about generosity and all that kind of thing, what do you see as you look 5 to 10 years in the future as boomers who are now well into their 70s, their estates start to transfer, et cetera? What is the potential for charities, not-for-profits, and even for businesses as you look ahead?
It's massive. I think the number, Boston College did a study, it's in the magnitude of like 18 trillion is about to be transferred or is in the process right now of being transferred from boomers to the next generations like millennials. And so what's going to happen is that a certain segment of people, not everybody, right? Because a lot of people are not going to be receiving that, right? But the people that are going to be in a situation where they become resource unconstrained to live, as much of the lifestyle that they want to live, and they are going to come to a head at some point of, there's got to be more. There's got to be more to a fulfilling life than just being set for life, quote unquote. And so they're going to be looking to organizations like the church to find purpose and meaning. They're going to be searching it, within their work and their career. And what people are going to run into, I fundamentally believe, is that generosity and giving and living a life beyond yourself is going to be one of the cornerstones to living a fulfilled and satisfied life here on this earth. And when that revelation starts to happen over the next decade, there is going to be an incredible explosion of opportunity for churches, nonprofits to facilitate this energy and to transfer it into incredible impact and solving real problems on the local and global scale. If you think about it, right, there are organizations like Charity Water that on some level has solved how to get clean water into places that need it. Mm-hmm. So why haven't we been able to fully solve this problem? There's a resource constraint. Yeah. If we actually lift that resource constraint, if we can turn that $450 billion to $1 trillion in a year, just imagine a lot of the problems we can actually eradicate, right?
Well, and poverty is literally being not solved, but a lot of poverty has been eradicated in my lifetime. Like if you look at the stats between the 90s and today, there are so many more people who have a sustainable way of life, access to clean water, food, and the basic necessities than they did even 20 years ago.
That's right. That's right. So there's an abundance, right? It's not that we don't have the resources to solve these problems. We actually have enough resources to solve food insecurity because America alone throws away enough food to feed the whole world twice. Wow. So it's not a resource problem. It's a distribution, allocation problem. And so we believe that if we remove friction from people being able to allocate and distribute, that's more aligned with their intent, we actually unlock a whole net new channel for resources.
So that's a great vision. Walk us through how the technology is working now. And I know it's continuing to evolve probably as we speak, but if I want to donate $10,000 worth of some stock or crypto, how does that work? And we'll talk a little bit more about crypto before we're done. But how does that work exactly?
Yeah. So let's say you attend a church like Elevation Church. You would go to their giving page, right, to be part of maybe their year-end giving campaign. And you would actually see there today an opportunity to donate stock or crypto. That's powered by Overflow. So you click on donate or give stock, and then you authenticate via a code that we send to, let's say, your phone number. And
is that like two-factor authentication?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. And so now when you're in, you can connect your brokerage account directly. So let's say that you have your stock in Charles Schwab. The same login and password that you use when you go to charlesschwab.com, you'd actually use within our web application as well.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you log in, and then once that's connected up, you don't have to connect it again. We keep it a secure, persistent link to it, right? And now you can see your portfolio all in one place, right? Wow. And so you can see, I have Facebook stock because I used to work at Facebook. I have Tesla stock because I bought Tesla stock 2 years ago as an investment. And I have all these appreciated gains. And if you know a little bit about, tax efficiency, the best way to give is actually from your gains. We say give from your gains because you eliminate capital gains tax in those scenarios, right? And then when the church actually receives it and liquidates it, because they're a 501c3 tax exempt organization, they actually don't need to pay those capital gains tax, which is beautiful because it goes towards more impact. Yeah. Yeah. So you're in the platform, you select the stock that you want to give, and then you do a couple more steps. You give us your e-signature. And then when you submit it, we take care of the rest. No more, headaches or, weeks and months of process and paperwork that you need to do by yourself. We do all the workflow automation on the back end for you. And in some cases, if it's a really large gift, with you, right? We call it concierge level support. If there's any human interaction that's needed, we have a dedicated support team to make sure that they're with you every single step of the way.
Wow. How long would it take for, say, not a concierge level, but somebody who wants to give a few $1,000s in stock to $10,000 in stock? As you said before, it was fax machines, days, weeks, whatever. What is the process now? How long would it take as the app is developed?
So the timeline actually is dependent on the sending brokerage, but let me give you the range.
No, but I mean for the user.
Yeah.
If I want to make the donation,
exactly.
Is that taking me 10 minutes, 10 hours? Like how long is it going to take me?
Yeah. So it takes you probably 5 minutes to, at maximum, to facilitate the initiation of the gift. And then if you're using Charles Schwab, it'll be settled within 24 hours, like stock in the church's brokerage account.
Wow. And then, so does the church then end up, or the charity or the receiving organization, they become stockholders, or is it converted at disposition to dollars?
Yeah, so it's mixed. So many churches don't want to be in the business of managing our portfolio, right? Yeah. And so they have the gifts immediately liquidated into cash and then ACH'd into their checking account. But some churches, hold tier 1 tech stock. There are certain nonprofits like UNICEF that wrote in the New York Times a couple of years ago that they're going to hold Bitcoin, right, in reserve. And that's worked out really well for them. So it's a mix. My vision for the future is that nonprofits, churches, universities continue to take a more hybrid approach to portfolio management, especially if they don't have immediate liquidity needs.
Right.
The reality is there's endowments like Harvard that have positioned themselves to be an organization that's going to be around for a while because they were really clever with how they managed their assets.
Yeah.
Right. And now they get to really think forward looking, and they get to do a lot of cool things because they're no longer resource constrained and they're taking a portfolio approach. I would love to democratize that type of mentality across more and more high impact organizations, because I believe it's going to encourage more innovation and unlock more opportunities.
That's a really interesting vision for the future, and I didn't know the answer to that question. Tell me about the hurdles you had to overcome to get the technology to where it is today. I'm sure that could be a couple hours right there.
Oh, it could definitely be a couple hours, and they're ongoing. So here's the biggest challenge, Carey. The biggest challenge is that the brokerages actually do not have an incentive to send out stock for charitable purposes.
Oh, wow.
Why? Because the way that a brokerage or a wealth manager makes money, and that's not a bad thing, it's just where their incentives are aligned, is holding the assets. Because they take an assets under management, an AUM fee, right? Anywhere from several basis points to 1%, 2%, it could be, right? Depending on what firm or company that you're working with. And so when assets leave where it's custodied, they're making less. So there's no incentive for the brokerage industry to innovate, to make it easier for people to donate stock and release assets from their custody and their ownership, right? Because their fees go down then. And so that is fundamentally the biggest uphill battle that we continue to have to navigate, right? And so we're aligning our incentives with what the donor wants to do and ultimately what the nonprofit is ready to receive.
So have you figured out how to incentivize them at all?
Not yet.
No.
One thing is that, these features of being able to give a charitable stock donation is starting to become more and more common and starting to become more and more table stakes because there is customer demand for it. And so because, Charles Schwab customers, Fidelity customers, Vanguard customers want to do this, the brokerages have to support it, right? And so it's interesting, actually. The way to actually overcome this and to continue to align our incentives more with the brokerages is to continue to inspire the world to give. The more and more people that actually want to give, the more and more incentive it is for the brokerage to innovate their features to make this easier and easier over time.
And I suppose for the self-directed investor, it's not a problem at all, right? If you don't use a brokerage, if you do it yourself. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about crypto because we're getting into it a little bit on the podcast this year. It's been around for a long time. There's all kinds of views on it, from it is evil incarnate to it's not going anywhere. Why are you guys getting so excited? It's just a fad. It's going to disappear, to this is the future. It's the absolute future of money. I'd love to get your thoughts just on crypto as a whole, as a category, and why probably, I'm sure there are some people who listening who have theological, philosophical objections to even receiving crypto. Should we be receiving it, et cetera, et cetera. Thoughts on crypto from somebody who has probably been very close to it. A lot of your friends are probably creating crypto, right? So let's talk about that for a little bit. Thoughts on crypto.
Yeah. Is it a fad? I definitely don't think it's a fad. I think it's definitely here to stay. In 5 years, are we only going to be transacting in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? I don't think so, right? I would fall somewhere in the middle. Here's an example. How long has ACH, how long has online giving been around? And how many people in your church or your organization still give in check?
Oh, yeah.
Checks are still here, right? I mean, it's not maybe the best way, but it's still here. Okay.
Yep. You're right. No, very few. I think I'm not as in the weeds as I used to be. We still have a checkbook though. And every once in a while, we'll say, oh, should we write a check? I'm like, we're not that old. Like, no.
Exactly.
So, we can do an ACH. We can do a transfer.
It's definitely phasing out, but these legacy things, last for a while is my point. And so my view on cryptocurrency, I think that there's two ways that cryptocurrency is viewed right now. And the other term that's being coined is Web3, really. One is crypto being a store of value. The most famous case is Bitcoin, right? Yeah. As a hedge against inflation, right? And I think there's a lot of validity to that. Regardless of my views on the validity of it, I do believe that there's a new floor because of how many large institutional money has pretty much been underwriting it, right? So some of the biggest banks, Tesla, Square, now Block, they've literally put a large stake in Bitcoin. And so there's some sort of floor to it being a store of value. Right. So
you mean, in other words, it's not going to go below a certain level because of all the institutional investment? Yeah.
Correct. Right. Because it's hit a tipping point where there's enough institutional backing behind it that it's going to keep some level of value to it. Right. Is it, justifying it being 60,000? I don't know. That's probably why it corrected a little bit. Maybe not today. Maybe in the future, but a lot of that is just based on people's continued belief in it. Right. That's what the store of value.
Well, ultimately, that's what the money system is anyway.
Exactly.
Right. Like when you think about it, the dollar, that's what the dollar is. It's people's belief that this has value. Or when I show you, here's an ACH that has so many digits associated with it. We're only transferring numbers at this point. There's no gold that moves. There's no actual money that shuffles out of an account. It's perceived value.
Exactly. And so from a store of value standpoint, I definitely think it's here to stay as one of the places people choose to hold value. The other thing, and kind of more prevalent right now, is the actual utility and potential applications on top of Web3. Right. And so the most recent case that has really been taking off is this idea of NFTs.
Right.
Okay. And what's interesting about NFTs is the ability
non-fungible tokens. Just for the uninitiated. Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Exactly. No, yeah, this is good. The interesting thing that NFTs has been able to prove is that it can catalyze communities, right, around a certain thing. So it could be a JPEG. It could be, there's one around golf right now called LinksDAO, right? And it's essentially people saying, I want to be a member of this community. And because I have an NFT, I now have a right to all of the benefits that this community is going to continue to provide over time, right? And as that becomes more cachet, the value of that membership continues to go up, right? And so it's really interesting. I, just find all of this amusing because a lot of the things that I think people are trying to get to, I actually believe the church has been doing for thousands of years. Venture capitalists and founders talk about how community is the new moat, community is the only thing that really differentiates your company or your organization from really lasting, I just immediately go to, this is exactly what Jesus has been saying in relation to the church and why it's lasted for thousands of years, right? So.
Yeah, and it's almost like when you look at DAOs, et cetera, it's almost, which is decentralized autonomous organizations and the whole Web3 metaverse kind of idea. It feels like we're trying to escape the bad things that we've created here and create a more idealized world somewhere out there. Not realizing, of course, that we're going to bring all of the problems that we created on Earth with us into the metaverse. And but it is sort of that I think you could argue there's an eschatological, like a longing for heaven, a kind of, we have to transcend this mess that we've made, which really is the Christian story, right? But that doesn't stop Snoop Dogg from buying real estate on the metaverse.
Exactly. So you made such a profound point, Carey. So if we snapped our fingers today, right? Or let's not do that. Let's just even say, let's say God answered our prayer today to solve all the world's problems right now. Let's say there was no more, world hunger. Let's say, everybody had clean water. Let's say everybody had enough resources to live a decent lifestyle, right? Nobody got murdered. In 10 years, we're going to have people without clean water. We're going to have people that are hungry. Why? Because the reality is that the only thing that will sustainably change the world is actually the change that happens internally first. I agree. Right? And so that doesn't mean, or abdicate our responsibility to try to solve these problems externally, right? But that just means that when I talk about things like Overflow, I'm trying to solve an external and an internal thing simultaneously. So that's why I always tell people, hey, this is really cool that we're facilitating tens of millions of dollars in donations to these organizations, and they're able to turn it into solving problems. But what's just as cool for me is that person gave. Regardless of what they gave to, that person gave. Because I know what happens when you release resources. Something happens intrinsically. Something happens mentally. And all of a sudden, if your mindset changes, that's when we can actually sustainably change the world, right?
This is a fascinating conversation, Vance. So I want you to imagine, as you hinted at, 5 to 10 years down the road, what will currency look like and giving look like in the world, as we think about AI, as we think about crypto, as we think about Web3, the metaverse, DAOs, et cetera, NFTs, what would a reasonable and probably a hybrid future, like Web 2 is not going away. The internet as we know it today is probably not going to disappear. It's the same thing like money will probably, as we know it, backed by a central government, be around at least for a while longer. If crypto doesn't take over everything, or maybe crypto goes away. I'm with you. I wouldn't count on it going away entirely at this point, because it powers so much of the blockchain, right? That's the currency that is accepted there. But 5 to 10 years from now, what can a leader leading an average church, an average small business come to expect when it comes to the world of finance and the world as we imagine it?
Yeah. So in the next decade, what's going to happen is a transformation. Today, we're still very much a consumer-centric society. That's going to change to a giving economy, right? And so in a consumer-centric society, Amazon is king. And so literally just the other day, we remodeled our bathroom, and by a click of a button, I could purchase a new bathtub, literally a bathtub. And it's at my doorstep the next day. Because of Amazon, right?
Yeah.
So in a consumer-centric society, Amazon is king. But what we're going to do is we're going to create the Amazon for giving, right? The Amazon for generosity. But what has to be the precursor to that? We have to layer a social currency and a social signal to giving. Giving has to become cool. Giving has to become aspirational. giving has to become inspirational. And so one of the fundamental problems is the narrative. So for example, Forbes every single year publishes the richest people on the planet based on net worth. So that's just one example of how our society incentivizes people to keep, right? So if I want to be on that list, I shouldn't give. I should sign some sort of pledge so that I can give when I die, but I want to stay on the list. Okay. And so what's going to happen is people are already figuring this out, especially millennials and Gen Z. Hey, that doesn't do anything for me being on that list, right? We need to make a new list. The new list, I actually don't have anything wrong with a list that said how much I made in my lifetime, right? But there has to be a corresponding list next to how much I made to how much I gave.
Wow.
Okay. So now we're going to have this social signal where it's cool to be generous, to be prosperous, to be an entrepreneur, to be innovative, to do well in your career, but also to be generous, right? To convert some of that success and give it back and solve real problems, right? And that's going to lead to a fulfilling life. And so as we change that narrative, the blockchain and cryptocurrency and Web3, what that allows us to do is when people are giving through our platform, we're going to be able to exchange it. We actually created this already with a generosity token. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So for every single, let's say, for example, dollar value at the time that you gave it, dollar for dollar, you're going to be given a generosity token. The generosity token, the best analogy I can come up with is like Delta Sky Miles points.
Sure.
Right? But for giving. And so when you reach certain levels, we will, as Overflow, actually match those dollars and multiply your giving towards whatever organization. And so we start to reward systematically through the blockchain, right? We start to reward some of the most generous people on the planet. Proverbs 11:24, the world of the generous gets larger and larger. And that person that is continually being generous, they don't have to only give from their checking and savings. They can give stock, they can give crypto, they can give a used car, they can give part of their wine collectible, they can give equity from their home, they could give anything, right? The same way you can buy anything on Amazon, you'll be able to give anything through Overflow. And when we create that ecosystem and that giving economy, we believe that the future, being more generous, is a better future and more aligned future for our kids to what we actually intend it to be.
That's a beautiful vision. I have to ask a really simple question. So when you say matching, normally what happens in sort of the current world is I've got a generous donor sitting over there in another room who doesn't want to be identified. Any gift that, up to $100,000 will be matched if you give by X. Are you talking about that? Or are you actually talking about mining on the web? Or like, how are you going to match those? Because you have somebody who gives $10 million. How do you match that?
Exactly. So it's not going to be a match dollar for dollar, but it's going to be a match to a certain amount based on your status as a generous giver through the platform. So one simple example is that today, Overflow, we tithe off our revenue. So we actually give 10% back to our customers, right? But we do it in a really cool way. We divide up 10% of our revenue across our employees, and they get to choose which organizations they want to give it to. And they write a letter, and they write a letter back to the customer saying why, they chose them, right? So you think about this, we're going to be doing this at scale for all of our donors as well. And so we're going to be directing a portion of our revenue to be able to match to a certain amount. So let's say you give, $100,000 based on your level with the generosity token, we might match up to $5,000, for example, right? So that your gift is now $105,000, and that's $5,000 that otherwise, wouldn't have been matched unless it was kind of incentivized through Overflow.
Do you worry theologically? I just got to ask it because I know there's going to be a bunch of comments about like recognition. The right hand shouldn't know what the left hand is doing. And I must admit, I have airline status and it's pretty cool. I don't know whether I want donor status. Do you know what I mean? Is there
Totally.
any downside to that? Thoughts?
Oh, 100%. So, I think the Bible is really clear about that and the heart posture behind giving. And in no ways, is our intent to create some sort of leaderboard that's publicly facing, right? When I talk about kind of the Forbes list and narrative, that's more of just kind of the media storyline where we need to shift some perspectives there.
Yeah,
but in a functional standpoint, no, people don't, especially some of the most generous people in our church, they don't do it for recognition. They don't want to be on a leaderboard. They don't care to be known, which is beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Their heart's in the right place. At the same time, while they might not be looking for a public platform, they do appreciate private recognition, if that makes sense.
And I think everybody who's led a charity knows that.
Exactly.
If you ignore the people who sacrificed, that's a problem.
Exactly. And so, our platform, creating a scalable way where people can do that, in a personalized manner, we believe is the right mix. So I fully agree with you. I think it does become weird when you try to gamify giving, and that's not the intent behind it. It's more, how do we continue to unlock, incentivize, and encourage the same way that Facebook, crafts, or now Meta, right? Crafts their whole product, right, around habit building. How can we take some of those things in a healthy way to create good habits, right?
I love the vision and the heart behind it, Vance. Got to ask you, so 5 years in the future, some of the leading churches, it started already, have metaverse campuses, online church on Web 2, social media presence, and in-person services, and decentralized gatherings, et cetera. It's going to be a different world. Financially, what does that look like? You've got crypto coming in from the metaverse. You've got stock donations. Like, just paint any treasurers listening or leaders listening who are like, wait, what should I get ready for? What does that look like from a giving standpoint 5 years from now?
Yeah, you nailed it. The treasurers, the CFOs, the executive pastors, the head of development, the CFOs that are listening to this, really, I would encourage you to either learn and educate yourself about these non-cash assets and how to receive them. Obviously, we exist to help you do that. But even outside of us, there's so much content online where you can get up to speed, at least on the basics and the fundamental principles around this movement, because it's coming, right? Whether people believe in it or not, it's definitely coming. Actually, it's here. We're facilitating tens of millions of dollars through our platform today to churches and nonprofits in the form of non-cash assets. And so if you are lagging behind in enabling this for your givers and your supporters, you're fundamentally just going to be missing out on some potentially significant needle-moving, game-changing gifts, right? And so in addition to just getting versed on it, I would really encourage leaders in the philanthropic space and in the church space to start thinking about how to staff for it. Because it's not just about the ability to communicate and facilitate these gifts, and hopefully through partners like Overflow, but it's thinking through, how do we actually effectively manage this going forward?
What kind of skill set will you need for staffing in that area?
Yeah, so let's just talk about the church space specifically. Typically, the CFO is not a traditional CFO.
Right.
In the church space, the CFO is the person that knows how to use a spreadsheet.
Yeah, you're right. 100%.
Or the person that's most financially inclined within the organization, right? And so I would just encourage it. Nothing wrong with that. I think, especially in the church planning stage, you do whatever you can to continue to grow your church and to be scrappy. I love that. I live in that space. At the same time, I do think that we need to progress as a space to think a lot more seriously about providing, let's say it needs to remain that person, to providing the resources and the education or the investment into that person to pursue the education they need to level up in that role, so that we can be a lot more sophisticated in the way that we think about and manage. Because this is already happening in the for-profit space. This is already happening in industry, right? And that's why we have iconic brands like Apple, their ability to continue to last for decades, right? We want our churches to do the same. And so I think we need to think about that, how we staff it.
Well, so if you're thinking about fintech or even online businesses or brick and mortar businesses that have a significant online presence, what are the degrees, skills that the finance department or the online commerce department, or even fintech organizations, financial technology organizations are hiring for? Are they looking for accountants? Are they looking for software engineers? Like who are they hiring?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If I were to distill this to the first principle truth here, really what the world has transitioned to is a world that really rewarded specialists.
Yeah.
Right? And people that specialized. And what the world is now rewarding is generalists.
It's true. That is so true.
And so really what you're looking for is people that can think critically, that know how to problem solve, and that can have a broad array of perspective, right? And so as much as they know the function of sales, like the principles of how to sell, they understand software enough to know which software pairs best with that function, right? And so the people that are being rewarded are the people that have a breadth of knowledge that can stitch a lot of things together, because to our point earlier, automation is allowing us to not have to specialize in so many things, because computers are actually becoming better at certain specialized functions than humans.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Okay. That's good. So you're really looking, and I would say somebody who's probably agile, somebody who is curious, someone who can pivot, someone who can think broadly, and someone who's aware of trends rather than this is how I've done it for the last 40 years,
exactly.
how I'm going to do it forever. Vance, this is fascinating. I'm very excited to see what you're doing. And I do think that this is an ushering in conversation of a world that I barely knew existed. So thank you for that. Tell us, if people want to know more, where can they find you, and where can they learn more about Overflow?
Absolutely. So if you want to learn more about Overflow, overflow.co, overflow.co. And then I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. You can just search Vance Roush, VanceRoush.
Well, Vance, thank you so much. I so appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Carey.
Thanks for watching the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I hope today's episode has helped you thrive in life and leadership. If you haven't done it already, head on over to careynieuwhof.com, where millions of leaders access leadership insights, tips, and strategy. You can also sign up for my email list, where I send out an almost daily tip, just a short nugget on leadership insight and strategy, and I'd love to connect with you there. And now it's time for a generosity tip with Jim Shepard, who is the principal at Generis. This episode is brought to you by Generis, helping you create a thriving culture of generosity.
One of the elements of developing this culture of generosity we're talking about is including gratitude, thank you, expressing thankfulness to your givers. Here's what I'd say. Gratitude is important because it's a state of mind, a state of your heart of being truly thankful for the people in your church who've given their hard-earned money to see the vision that God's put in front of you implemented. Without their resources, your vision doesn't go anywhere. In this season, as with what we've been through the last couple of years, where we have churches that are off by 15 and 20% in terms of in-person presence, some even more, and yet their giving is not only not down, in some cases it's up. Seems to me you ought to be truly thankful to them for that. Make that your foundation and build it from there. Gratitude is an important part of building a culture of generosity. God bless you as you seek to build God's kingdom.